Hello and welcome to Urban Drainage and Water Supply D21UD, and at last we've reached the water supply part of urban drainage and water supply. If you don't remember, my name is Scott Arthur and I'm the course leader for this course. So this class will just really provide an overview of water supply systems and hopefully get to think about some of the key issues the management of these systems faces over the next few years. So the aim is the understanding the nature of water supply systems and provide enough understanding to design the layout of a basic water supply network. So let's have a think about that. So why bother? We'll have to think about the materials the systems constructed from, so that's in terms of strength and durability, and just like with sewer systems, also the internal hydraulic roughness. Pressure is quite important as well. We have to make sure that customers have a suitable pressure range so that the typical example is they can fill their bath in it over a reasonable period of time. We have to design for the times of high demand. For most networks, the highest demand will come when there's a fire and the fire service connect their tenders to the network to draw water from it. Another time of high demand is it's less common now, is where we have a severe winter in countries like the UK, and this results in pipes freezing, which causes, as the water expands as it freezes, it causes the pipes to burst, and that can result in significant demand. We have to enable future growth, just like with our sewerage systems. We have to make sure there's capacity there to support development, and we also have to think about how we maintain the network. So if we think about Edinburgh and you know the challenges it faces, serving around 404,000 customers in Edinburgh, and it's supplying 184 million litres of water per day. So that means that water has to be collected, treated and distributed to customers. This is via 4 locks and reservoirs, 1 intake, 4 water treatment works, 11 service reservoirs, 2 water pumping stations, and around 2,500 kilometres of pipework, all of which has to be maintained. But in general, just like with sewerage systems, I keep on saying this, the networks in the UK can be up to 150 years old. The older parts of the network have been built using methods and materials which are no longer suitable. In some parts of the world, there'll still be lead piping or lead jointing piping, which isn't ideal for human health. And a replacement rate of 0.5% to 1% per year. That means we're going to be left with some of these older assets for some time. So typically, where the water supply provision is concerned, there's a number of key performance indicators. Obviously, water quality, so we want to make sure there's no significant reduction in water quality between where the treated water enters the network and where it reaches the supply. So your network is making a measurably different impact on a significant impact on the water quality. We're concerned about the quantity and the pressure of supply. Breakages in service, obviously not ideal. Restrictions on water use, so it's not that uncommon in the UK for over warm dry summers that we would have restrictions on, say, people watering their gardens. Washing their cars tends to be the first level of restriction, and also there's targets for leakage as well. So where rehabilitation is concerned of the network, there's two approaches really: proactive, where you're trying to identify the parts of the network which are problematic, and then you're repairing them or replacing them before they fail; and reactive, where you're waiting for the network to fail, and then you're going to repair it. Obviously, there's always a balance between these two approaches, and probably the best approach is to get a balance between the two different types. It's about effective using your resources the most effectively. Reactive is more suitable for kind of like critical assets. So if you've got part of the network which is absolutely key, you want to absolutely make sure that doesn't break down. And when you're thinking about how you rehabilitate your network, you should really be thinking about how you maximise the service indicators, which I showed you in the previous slide. So, unlike sewage systems, because water networks are a relatively clean environment, it's much easier to instrument them and have a sort of real-time understanding of what's happening. Because yes, flow meters etc. can be installed in sewage systems, but because it's a much more hostile environment, technology isn't always as reliable. Whereas with water supply systems, real-time monitoring can flag up where you have substantial leaks or pressure issues quite quickly. And you can also, and as suggested there, you could also map customer complaints. One of the issues with sewage systems mapping customer complaints is often where the customer is reporting the complaint from. It's hard to identify which actual part of the sewer network, if any, the flooding issue or whatever is coming from. Whereas with water supply systems, if someone has cloudy water or low pressure or no water, they can tell you exactly where their property is, and you know exactly which part of the network is serving that. So obstacles. So due to the way assets have been managed, very little is known about what is under the ground. So the true nature of a lot of the assets isn't clear, and few countries have assets that go back beyond 20 or 30 asset records, accurate ones that go back beyond over 20 or 30 years. So predicting failures within that context can be difficult. And as I said in the previous slide, improvements to instrumentation and IT mean that real-time monitoring can be a useful tool. So we have legislation and regulators to make sure networks are operated properly in the UK and in other countries. And just like with sewage systems, regulators have the power to adjust customer bills where the level of service is not acceptable. They can also have the power to force providers to compensate customers. So that goes back to what I said in the introduction about sewage systems, and that these are monopoly provision, and so because of that, there would otherwise be less incentive for a network operator to improve their service because there's no competitor for customers to switch to. So therefore, for a water supply company under regulation to be able to increase their bills, they have to show that service is improving. So water supply networks represent a substantial asset. Large amounts of the network are upgraded per year, but still a relatively small percentage, 1% or so. We can assess performance using performance indicators, and understanding the operation of the network is key to scheduling maintenance. Right, so in terms of networks types, there's really three different types. There's pumped gravity and pumped in gravity. So pump systems, so this is where the water is pumped from some location to individual properties. Now, pump without storage isn't a good idea because there's no reserves provided for an event of a loss of power. So when you lose power to your pumping station, you lose water supply. You have to constantly vary flow to meet demand. So when there's high demand, in the morning when people are waking up, going to the toilet, having a shower, making themselves something to eat, you have to have the pumps ready and also the treatment ready to match that demand. And your peak in water supply demand coincides with peak in power demand, so you're paying the highest rates for your pumping costs as well. So pumped with storage, it's much more common. Flow so you pump, basically you're treating and pumping flow to storage at a constant rate. So you don't have to vary the rate at which you're treating your raw water or the rate at which it's pumped. And basically you manage the peak by making sure your storage is full at the start of that peak time. So you can even only pump it off peak times. So you could fill your storage tank, your distribution reservoirs at the overnight and allow them to draw down during the day, then fill them up overnight again. So it helps, as I say there, it helps equalise demand on the system. And it also allows demand to be met at times of unusually high short-term demand. Okay, so that goes back to the fire tender situation I talked about at the start. So just like with our drainage systems, we have to think about, when we're designing a new system, we have to think about what future demand is going to be with the development, and based on the type of land use and type and size of properties, etc., and any industrial and commercial uses. Similarly, again, we look at the topography, because we want to use that as much as possible. Establish demand for each sub-area. Lay out primary interlocking loops serving areas of demand. So interlocking loops are important because if you have a looped water supply, so see if I can find my pen. So if you have, this is our development, and you've got a water supply coming in. If your network is like that, like your drainage network might be, what that means is if you have a problem at a point there, say, it means that all this area is without water. Whereas if you had so I'm trying to change the colour of my pen here, it's not proving easy. If you had a loop network, so your loop, perhaps like this, it means that every point in the network is supplied from two sides. So it means that if you've got a break in supply here, like I had there, it means that people in this area can be supplied by going around that way or even around that way. So it gives you extra resilience in how you manage your network. You have to think about the consumption in terms of domestic, trade and industrial, agricultural, public. You have to think about losses. So this is unaccounted for water, so you've got your leaks, misuse or unnecessary use, so that's something you've not really planned through, and metering and other losses. So one of the issues is you could have water meters in your network, and you could be using them to understand where the flow is going. But if those water meters aren't accurate, then it doesn't really tell you the total sum of how much water is being used. So leaks, typically this can vary between 6% in small networks to 55% for large old networks. At one point in Glasgow, over 50% of the water supplied, treated, was being lost in leakage. The problem Glasgow had, the way it was managed, the network was managed in the past, it was always cheaper just to build extra treatment capacity than it was to identify the leaks. So they were just pumping more and more water into the network and hoping that some of it got through to the customer. Expressing losses as a percentage, however, can lead to false comparisons. So the issue there is that a percentage of, well, it's really easy to understand saying that 20% or so, if your water is lost due to leakage, that's a useful figure to know and to benchmark against. But it's really hard to compare that to other networks because it's down to factors like pressure and also the length of pipe network that you have in your system. So a much more an accurate way maybe a more accurate way to talk about litres per kilometre of pipe which is lost to leakage, or even leakage per connection. It's broadly recognised that it's difficult to get leakage down below 16 to 17%. And this is because once you get down to that level, it tends to be there's lots of very small leaks that you're trying to identify, and that can be quite difficult. Whereas if you're losing 55% of your flow, it's reasonable to make the assumption that some of them are through some quite large leaks, and you can invest time and effort in identifying them. Over the last decade or two, pressure management has become quite an important way of reducing leakage. So this is about realising that the higher the pressure in your network, the more flow you're going to lose due to leakage, because basically the pressure is forcing the water out through any weak spots in the pipe. So it's recognised that if you can reduce the pressure you're supplying to customers, you'll also reduce your leakage. So what's done now is where pressure is quite high, higher than a customer might need, the pressure of the pipe, that pipework's reduced in the hope that reduces leakage. So there's some sense in that. So wastage, where water is cheap or not metered, wastage can be as high as 50 litres per day. Where metering is at a block level, consumption is 25 to 40% higher. So what the point that's making is that water meters tend to reduce consumption because people know that the more they use, the more they pay. But if the water meter is fitted to an apartment block, just 1 meter for the whole block, it's less of an incentive for people to reduce their consumption, because they know that if they're having lots of baths and lots of long showers, they won't be paying for all that themselves. Their neighbours will be sharing that extra cost with them. Regulation is key. In the UK 2001, WC flush volumes dropped from 7.5 to 6 litres per second. In the USA in 92, they dropped from 26 to 6 litres per second. So and maximum flow rates through showers and taps have dropped substantially since that time as well. So there's less waste in properties because we've got more water conservation measures embedded into regulation. In the UK, 1 in 6 customer supply pipes leak, 20 to 60 litres per day, and metering can half this value. So how does metering half that value? Well, the issue is that if this is your garden, that's your garden wall, and here's your house. It's a fantastic drawing here. Just change my pen colour. Going past outside in the street outside your garden is the water supply pipe, which is serving your street, and then you have a pipe which serves your house. Now, in the UK, you are there's some variation in this, but by and large, you are responsible for the pipe as it crosses your boundary wall. So at that point, you become responsible for managing the pipe. So if you get a flow meter installed, the water company is going to put it kind of there, just as it crosses your garden wall, so under it hopefully. So what happens then is that the customer gets the water meter installed. Customer then has a look at the water meter and spots that the little dial spinning even when there's no water being consumed inside the house. So why is this, they wonder? And the reason why it is because this section of pipe here is often responsible for a lot of the leaks. As it says there, it can be 20 to 60 litres per dwelling per day. Okay, so that's quite substantial. So I'm a bit of a fan of water meters because I think they do encourage people to think about how they use water. We don't really have them that much in Scotland because politically, when it's been discussed in the past, people have been reluctant to install them, and that's because it would be seen as an extra cost, because right now in Scotland water is incorporated within the bill for local government, and if you were to meter supply, an extra bill would be dropping through people's letterboxes, and so it would be seen as an extra bill, so people might not be that happy with that. And I think there is also a valid argument that says that water's a right, so why should we be charging for it? And there is something there. Another issue is if you're charging for water via metering, what do you do if someone doesn't pay their bill? Do you cut them off? And then what then if they catch some horrible disease? So it is a complicated issue, but ultimately metering supply should reduce demand, and that reduces all the energy we invest in treating water and pumping it around the country. So it's a good thing, but the trick is how we get it right for people who have problems paying their bill, and how we support them. One thing I read some time ago was that rather than cutting your supply off, basically your pressure would be reduced, so it would make it quite inconvenient. You could still flush your toilet, cook, drink water, have a bath, have a shower, etc., but all at a much lower pressure, and this would force you to actually pay the bill. So there's things like that perhaps, I'm not saying that's the solution, but there's things like that could be done. Another argument the Scottish Government puts forward around this, I'm not sure, I've never done something like an analysis to back it up, is they accept that there'd be a significant carbon saving from installing meters because people would use less water, and that water has quite a reasonably high carbon footprint because the treatment costs, the cost of infrastructure and the cost of pumping it around. But what they say is that the carbon invested in constructing the meter itself and then installing it, it would take a long time for that to be paid back. So you've got, on one hand, you've got the benefit of less water being supplied, but they say the cost of installing the meter is far beyond that, particularly when it's getting retrofitted to existing properties. So yes, it's an interesting area. So factors influencing domestic demand. Well, obviously the size of the property, also the size of the household, the size of the property, the age group. If you've got kids, you'll know that they tend to use much water because they're washing more and you're washing them, etc. And seasonal variation. So certainly in the UK, you're much more likely to water your garden over the summertime than you are the winter time. And I think I talked earlier in the course, I forget which class now, I think probably class 2 perhaps, about how in the UK or in warmer countries we tend to wash more over the summer. So that was water that has to be supplied. So impact households can have a significant size of household can have a significant impact on water supply. So here you have this is per capita supply. So one person living in a house by themselves is using between 250 and 250 litres per person per day. But if you're in a household of 8 people, which is quite an unlikely scenario in the UK, you can see that your consumption is down to around 50 litres per head per day. And that's really because you're with more people in the house, you're sharing the water that you use for cooking, washing your dishes, washing your clothes, watering the garden, washing your car. If you've got 8 people in your house, or you perhaps might have more than one car, of course. So there's lots of efficiencies of scale there. So I'll come down and see you.
You hear that, John?
Yeah, I'll come down and see you. Sorry about that interruption. It happens. We'll just persevere. It'll be all right in the night. So basically, so you can see what's happening there. If you live alone, you tend to use more water per person than people who live together. No jokes about sharing showers or baths, etc. Please. But what we know about changing demographics right across the developed world is that the number of one single person households is increasing. So this figure here is one person households projected increase in numbers of one person households in selected OECD countries from the mid-2000s to 2025, 2030. So you see that in France they're expecting a 75% increase in the number of single person households, and even in Germany at the other end of the scale a 17% increase. So that means extra water is needed without a doubt. So if you're running a water company and you're putting together your strategy to take you up to 2030, you can see that you've got a challenge on your hands to build that. If you're going to meet that extra supply entirely, you've got to build extra infrastructure, or perhaps you can encourage people to use less water. Projected share of one person households 25 to 2030 as a percentage of all households. So in France, by 2030, 46% of all households will be single person households. So quite incredible, really. This is from a report, and I shall put the report on Vision for you to look at your leisure and perhaps unpick it a little. So what's happening? Well, the thing is that we're all living much longer, which is a good thing, of course. So the growth in population size is partly because of the ageing population. The percentage of the population that is 65 or older has increased between 75 and 2015 by 14.1%, from 14.1% to 17.8%, and is projected to continue to grow to nearly a quarter of the population by 2045. So basically, a lot more people are living older, and a lot of them are living in single person households, and that's the big challenge. And of course, coupled with that, this growing number of older people, which is a positive thing, absolutely a positive thing, means that the rest, because once you get beyond 65, typically people stop working or certainly reduce their working hours. It means that to maintain public services, etc., the remainder of the population has to work, pay taxes to do that. So the challenge facing governments and water supply companies, not just water supply companies actually, I mean every sector, is how we get more productivity out of younger people to help pay for this growing part of the population which is less economically active. And this chart pretty much shows the same thing. Shows that how the middle part of the population isn't growing that much. You know, in this it's the 16 to 64, so if you like, that's the more economically active people, even though the 16 to 18-year-olds are still at school largely. You know, these days you can work beyond 65 quite easily, but it's saying that that part of the population is not growing that significantly, but the part of the population beyond that is. And again, this is just a similar graph looked at a different way. So this is the so-called demographic time bomb that we all worry about. So when you look at water supply within that context, you know, we've got climate change, we've got, you know, the change in demographics, and we've got continued economic development to continue to cater with. There is a big challenge facing water supply. You know, how do we make sure people have clean drinking water, support economic development, but not become a huge liability in terms of the energy investment, etc. So what I'm going to run through here there was work done, I think, 2015, which looked at 5 alternative visions for the future in terms of water supply and economic development, how we develop as a society. So what's important here is that so this is really sort of visions of the future. It's not a prediction, and it's not that any one of these things is going to come true, although elements of all of them might happen in different places. Of course, it might just be business as usual. Nothing might change. There might be some tweaks, or we might wholly radical go down one of these 5 different vision routes. So just to end this class, I'm just going to reasonably quickly go through these. The report that I took these from is on vision, and have a look at that and see what you think. But what you'll see from that report is it's quite speculative. It's just getting people to think about, you know, what the issues are, rather than these have been hard and fast predictions. So remember to view this in a water context, but, you know, feel free to think about other aspects of the water cycle, particularly drainage. So more food is grown under Vision 1, green food and gardens, cityscapes. More food is grown in cities, both in and on buildings. Water is subject to highly monitored, highly managed system of systems spanning the city. Catchment and underground geology, ensuring climate resilient drainage, food production, etc. Water sensitive urban design management helps to underpin this vision. So straight away here we can see some links to SUDS. So we're talking about collecting water and source controls and using that to grow vegetation, which may eat. And if you think about the water cycle in the biggest possible, well, you know, the human water cycle in terms of a large physical scale, and you think back to when we looked at water demand earlier in the course, when we were looking at the drainage systems, what this is trying to tackle is also part of the water, which we invest in agriculture and food production. So this is about bringing food production closer to where people are, using the rainfall falling on cities to grow that food, rather than simply discharging it to a combined sewer system. Flood-proof cities. The existing cities, as well as new city areas floating on stilts, are designed to withstand sea level rise, extreme rainfall events, and the expansion of river floodplains. So that's interesting. So thinking about, you know, climate change, etc., increased flood risk, how do we deal with that? Well, rather than defending ourselves from the water, we build around it and try to accommodate it as much as possible. Methods of green infrastructure or nature-based solutions help to reduce the vulnerability to flooding, interception, storage, slow release of floodwaters, and heavy rainfall. So again, the SUDS are there as well, aren't they, as well as the water supply aspect. Smarter city networks, but I think this is already happening to an extent. Harnessing the power of the internet, every domestic appliance used by citizens and every utility network communicates key data on current anticipated needs, status and condition, etc. to city data hubs, which manage water supply and demand to ensure optimal efficiency and optimal economic and environmental performance. What a mouthful. So again, that's about thinking about, you know, when do we need the water, and for the different water uses within the home, when do we actually need them? So obviously when you wake up in the morning and you go to the toilet, you want to be able to flush your toilet. But when does your washing machine have to come on? Perhaps it could be using the internet. It could be timed at a time when there's less demand for water and also less demand for electricity. So rather than using these things at peak times, somehow we use the internet to do these things off peak times. This is already happening to a certain extent in areas where electricity price varies throughout the day. You can dial into the network at the time that suits you. So why not expand what we're doing with electricity there to also include water? cities and the underworld. So as functions increasingly move underneath the city and interact, there too the focus in the water sector is on how deep geology can be used to combine systems designed to deliver effective drainage, water, heating and cooling services. So this is about both, at a much smaller scale, using groundwater as a resource, about replenishing groundwater from the drainage of our properties, but also thinking about how we can use that groundwater as a heat sink to cool our properties during warmer weather and warm them during hotter weather. Again, this is already happening to some extent, but it's about how we get the scale right. Vision 5, Community and Transition Cities. Concerns about water and other key resources drive a new approach to environmental governance based on changing communities' habits and practices by transitioning these to a more sustainable level. This transition is achieved through supported utility-run programs. So that's about the water utility no longer providing water and drainage as a service, but providing a sort of knowledge base and a management framework as a service, and it becoming much more about communities managing their own water supply and drainage networks. Now that might seem a little bit extreme, but the picture here is the Findhorn community in Scotland, and that's pretty much what they do already. In Australia, off the back of the droughts we had a few years ago there was a move towards much more resilient water supply and drainage systems, which were going to be designed and managed at a community level, perhaps not by the community. So it's about, rather than going for big centralised plants, going for more localised assets and perhaps get the community involved in managing them within a stricter regulatory framework. Like I said at the start, none of these things are possible destinations, I don't think, but I think if you go back to look through all 5 of them, you can see that there is a place for little aspects of all of them to do more. I think we're already doing lots of these things, but this is about thinking, well, is there more we can do here to make the water supply and drainage, because it's not just water supply, infrastructure a little bit more resilient, to be able to cope with future demands and also help manage climate change. Final slide. So that's been my whistle-stop tour of water supply. As ever, if you've got any questions, please get in touch and I shall try my best to help you. Bye for now.